Welcome back. With Minister for Education Norma Foley bringing in new guidelines around the use of smartphones in primary schools, we're joined now by behavioural psychologist Paul Walsh to find out more about how these devices can impact our little ones. Good to see you, Paul. Really interesting topic. What was your take? I mean, got lots of headlines last week, Norma Foley launching these guidelines. What's your take on mobile phone use in primary schools?
It did, and you know what? I started asking around this. You know, I've lots of friends who are teachers. We run the Exercise Academy, so we've oodles of teachers who are connected with us. And we just kind of put the word out to say, well, is this a big problem in primary schools? Not hugely, because there's a blanket ban on them. There shouldn't, like phones for kids under the age of 12, it seems like a very simple no, you know? The data would suggest that it has a negative impact on their well-being. Like, we know that mobile phones are like this attention vacuum. They just suck our attention in. And when we look at this developmentally for children of a primary school age, Karen, it's a no-brainer. No.
Yeah.
UNESCO, who are the UN branch looking at education, science and cultural studies, in July said the exact same thing. There should be a blanket ban on mobile phones in primary schools for children around the world. And they said, put learners first. That was the word that they said. The technology isn't going to outweigh the social interaction, the learning that children have. And I think schools, a really good school, creates an environment for a child that is predictable, that is consistent, and that is safe. And I think even as parents, like, that's our gift to our kids. That's our gift. That's a school's gift to a child, is to create an environment that is predictable, consistent, and safe for them. So when you're trying to do that, and we know the risks that are associated with mobile phones, particularly smartphones, and I use the word mobile phone and smartphone interchangeably, but you're literally putting something with the capability of accessing any content in the world into the palm of the hand of a child. Now, I was talking with a friend yesterday, and he's in his 40s. He's a primary school teacher. I was asking him about this, and I said, you know, what do you think about it? And he said, man, do you remember I was 9 when I got a dictionary? And my friend got a dictionary. He said, what was the first thing you look up when you get a dictionary, right? And then we were like, oh yeah, that was the same for me, down the country.
Word. Was it a rude word?
Obviously.
The rudest words,
it's always the rude words that you go for. And then you go and put a smartphone with a much more capability than an Oxford or Collins English dictionary, and you put that in an innocent child's hand, and they're asking. So there's a lot to be said for a blanket no. There's also, you know, talk around controls, and we'll come to that in this segment, around controls of what we can do as parents, because eventually that child is going to get older, and there's going to be a time where they do have access. So how do we build digital capabilities for our kids as they become teenagers? How do we create that education for them and make sure that the safeguards of open communication between parents and kids are there?
In terms of at home then, so obviously, you know, I mean, Greystone's led the way in terms of supporting a policy where no child in the primary school should have access to their own smartphone. At home then, like, what do you think? Should we just be like, well, I see it with my own kids. If I literally put down that sounds like I have my phone all the time, but if they see my phone on the kitchen counter, they'll be picking it up. They'll be Googling stuff about their favourite footballer or whatever it is. Like, it's very difficult to keep it out of their hands, even if you're not buying one for them specifically.
And I'm talking to you as a parent as well, you know, like, and this is always tricky because it's a concern that we have. We're going, how are we modelling this to our own kids? Like, you know, my wife and I have an agreement that phones, we end up having to look at our phones at different stages throughout the day. And that's fine, you know, through work or whatever. But then there are times where it becomes a default, where you just pick it up out of boredom. But we've said to each other, if I do that, call me up on it. So we kind of act in tandem together. So it's not like we're calling each other out, but it is saying, look, we don't want to do that. We don't want to model to our kids that you're on your phone all the time. And it's a struggle because these are attention vacuums for us. That's the way phones are designed. And there's so much functionality on them that you can update your motor tax, you can buy a house, you can, you know, do anything on your phone that would typically, you know, 20 years ago have involved us leaving the house and going out to do that. So the modelling aspect of human behaviour is really important. I think when you're talking about Greystones and the idea of this being an agreement and a collective agreement, that's really important when it comes to behaviour change. Because when we're trying to, when I'm designing a larger behaviour change intervention, the social aspect is really, really important. That, behaviour change isn't something that happens individually, because I might say, I'm going to be the best person in the world. You were talking about, like, your partner jogging with you. That influence that you have on them making sure that they're getting up and that they're running is really, really important. When it comes to something like mobile phone use, you might have the best home policy. Your school might have the best school policy. But beyond that, in the larger social groups, if your child sees that their friend has a mobile phone or they have access to a smartphone or whatever device is there, there's going to be a lot of pester power put on you, particularly leading up to Christmas. Maybe not this Christmas, maybe not the one beyond that. So it's important for us to be aware of that. I think when we're thinking about this, protective factors are really important, because eventually, like we said, kids are going to have access to smart technologies like mobile phones.
And the thing what I find terrifying is that I didn't have it as a kid. So it's not like I can go, well, back in my day, we were allowed an hour screen time or whatever. It just seems to be such a fresh landscape to navigate as a parent that you're terrified they're going to see something that is just not age appropriate and their brains just aren't ready for it.
Yeah. And when we're thinking about protective factors, obviously, I've just said to you, I support a blanket ban in primary schools up to the age of 12. Bearing in mind that the age of digital consent in Ireland is 16. So that's important to note. When you're talking about what do I do at home as a parent, like how should I navigate this? The age of digital consent is 16, OK? That's important. And then,
what does that mean? That's when they're going to collect your data, the various apps or whatever?
Yeah, so from 13 to 16, then it's for the likes of TikTok and Instagram, with parental consent, you can access it. But there are certain rules that you can set around this. But before we even get into the rules, the really important thing is having that open communication with your child to say, it's OK to talk to me about what you might see. It mightn't even be something that you did. You might have been, secondary to this. It might be something that you did do. It might be something that you did and you regret. But you are OK to talk with me as your parent or your responsible adult. That's really crucial, even at a young stage, to build that into our digital education. To say, you know what? We all make mistakes. And you really want to be able to nip that in the bud and make sure that that's something that children are comfortable talking about. Because, like you said, we didn't grow up with this, We didn't grow up with this, but kids are growing up with this. So we need to be in tune with what's out there as much as possible.
Could you delve into more of the detrimental effects of kids being obsessed with these phones? Because as you mentioned, Karen, you notice yourself picking your phone up when you're walking up the stairs, but kids aren't going to be aware of the fact that they're picking up the phone and they're obsessed with it. So what effects is it having on the kids that are obsessed with the phone?
So one of the reasons UNESCO had said that they wanted it banned was it had a detrimental impact on powerful unrestricted device until they're old enough, and the dangers that can potentially happen. So they had said that it has a negative effect on children's emotional stability. OK, that's on a broader context. Attention, when we're talking about a child going to school, the one thing a teacher will always say is we want to keep their attention. We want to make learning fun. We want to make it engaging for children. And we know that phones zap our attention. And for a lot of us, it can become our default. It's a thing that we do without even thinking. I mentioned that there's a time where I'm waiting, I'm bored, I'm lonely, I'm in some sort of vacuum. I'll just take out my phone, and that's going to provide some short-term dopamine hit to me and fill that void. For children, that isn't necessarily something that they have grown up with or been born with. But as soon as we put a phone into their hand and give them that unrestricted access, if we give them that, you're saying to a child, rely on your willpower alone. And that's not really a good way to approach it, because as adults, we know that willpower has limitations for us. So what you're trying to do is make sure that the default doesn't become, I'm picking up my phone. So you flood as much as you can with alternatives that are there at home, chatting away with each other, playing toys. I'll often find out, I know my kids are much younger than yours, Karen, but you'll say, if I find myself on my phone and I get pulled up, I'm like, OK, let's go play with toys.
Absolutely.
Let's do something else. Let's go outside. Let's find...
Screens off,
But open communication, really strong protective factor. Yes, I do support that ban. And, just making sure that adults are that one step ahead of parents, or adults or kids is really important.
It's tough, but we're trying to keep up and trying to keep ahead.
It's so tough.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. Really